A lone cryonite warrior kneels in the snow, her ceremonial blade planted in ice. Her violet eyes lock on Major Frost as she speaks words no human soldier ever expected to hear. "Don't kill me. Earth male, I'll warm your bed." This isn't surrender, it's a cultural proposition that could change the entire war. Frost's boot crunched through the ice-crusted snow. His breath came in white plumes that hung in the sub-zero air. He swept his gaze across the wreckage-strewn battlefield, scanning for movement among the twisted metal of coalition transports. Near a downed vehicle, something shifted. His weapon came up, targeting systems activating with a soft chime. Crosshairs settled on a blue-skinned form. He expected attack, retreat, anything but what came next. The cryonite warrior knelt. She drove her ceremonial blade deep into the frozen ground with both hands. The gesture was deliberate, almost ritualistic. Her violet eyes locked on his, unblinking, through the swirling snow. Cobalt-colored fluid seeped from her wounds, mixing with the dark red of human blood in the snow around them. The two liquids swirled together in a macabre pattern, staining the ice with colors that had no business mingling. She spoke in clear, measured galactic common. "Don't kill me, Earth male, I'll warm your bed." The words hung between them, surreal against the backdrop of destruction. Frost's training screamed at him. Enemy combatant, immediate threat, standard engagement protocol. But her posture showed no aggression. Hands open, weapon planted, head bowed slightly. Every line of her body communicated something other than hostility. The offer felt like a cultural paradox defying all military doctrine he'd been taught. Frost processed the variables. Prisoner intake meant resources, intelligence potential, logistical complications. Immediate threat neutralization was clean, by the book, safe. But nothing about this felt like standard procedure. His finger hesitated on the trigger. The cold bit through his gloves. He weighed her unusual approach against the countless combat scenarios drilled into him. This moment stretched longer than any firefight he'd experienced. Finally, he lowered his weapon slightly. "I'm not accepting your specific offer," he said, his voice rough. "But I am sparing your life for now." The words felt alien coming from his mouth. They hung in the frozen air between them. The temporary truce began there in that circle of stained snow. Frost maintained his distance, watching her every movement. She remained kneeling, her eyes never leaving his face. The dynamic had shifted from combat to something entirely different. Cautious observation between two soldiers who should have been trying to kill each other. He kept his rifle ready, but no longer aimed directly at her. The wind picked up, howling through the wreckage. Frost calculated their exposure, the dropping temperature, the need for shelter. His mind raced through protocols for handling prisoners of war, none of which accounted for bed-warming proposals. She remained perfectly still, her breath creating smaller vapor clouds than his in the bitter air. The ceremonial blade remained planted between them like a strange flag of truce. Frost signaled his squad to hold position, his eyes never leaving the blue-skinned warrior. Bela maintained her kneeling position, her violet eyes never leaving Frost's. The wind cut across the ice between them, but she didn't flinch. "On Cryonis," she began, her voice steady despite the cold. "Warmth is not an invitation. It is a bond." She explained how her planet's brutal climate made survival a constant negotiation. Written treaties meant little in blizzards that could shred polymer and freeze ink. Trust had to be sealed through physical acts, something tangible, something that risked something real. Body heat exchange, she told him, was the ultimate gesture of good faith between former enemies. To share warmth meant lowering all defenses, offering vulnerability in a world where exposure meant death. It was how alliances were forged in the deep cold, where words lost meaning but shared shivers held truth. Frost listened, his rifle still ready but his mind working through the implications. This was a language he hadn't been trained to understand. He thought of human customs, handshakes in climate-controlled rooms, signatures on data pads, ceremonies under artificial light. None of it translated here. His traditions assumed shelter, stability, comfort. Hers assumed none of those things. The disconnect was total. Her offer wasn't about intimacy. It was about survival, a strategic move from someone who understood that trust had to be built like a fire, with effort, with risk, with shared fuel. Frost realized this wasn't surrender. It was negotiation from a position he hadn't recognized. She was bartering with the only currency that mattered on this frozen world: mutual survival. His training said to secure the prisoner, report to command, follow protocol. But protocol hadn't accounted for a warrior who offered trust instead of resistance. He had to choose, engage with her logic or enforce standard procedure. One path might lead to understanding, the other to permanent hostility. The cultural gap between them yawned like a crevasse. A misunderstanding here could doom any chance of alliance between their species. His finger rested near the trigger. The safe choice was clear. The right choice was not. He thought of all the briefings, all the intelligence reports that painted her people as merciless aggressors. None mentioned rituals of trust. None spoke of warmth as treaty. Frost made his decision. He didn't lower his rifle, but he leaned slightly forward. "Explain more," he said. "I'm listening." That simple choice to listen instead of shoot became the first step. It was a small thing, but on that frozen field it felt enormous. Vela's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. The tension between them shifted from combat readiness to cautious dialogue. Two soldiers from different worlds trying to find common ground on a sheet of ice. The wind howled, but for the first time it didn't feel entirely hostile. Frost raised his left hand, signaling his squad to hold position. They moved back, creating a loose perimeter around the kneeling warrior and the human soldier. The tension didn't leave the air, but it changed shape. Frost kept his weapon ready but lowered, his eyes fixed on Vela. He began assessing her value as something other than a combatant. Her knowledge could be substantial. Battlefield tactics, troop movements, command structure. She wore the markings of a seasoned warrior, not some fresh recruit. Her presence here, near a downed transport, suggested she might know something about the attack patterns. Frost considered the possibility of deception. This could be an elaborate trap, a way to get close to a human officer. But her eyes held no malice, only a steady determination that felt different from the aggression he'd faced in combat. Standard procedure was clear. Immediate transport to interrogation facilities. Secure the prisoner. Begin debriefing under controlled conditions. But procedures were written for expected scenarios. This situation fell outside all parameters. Her willingness to talk voluntarily suggested she might offer intelligence that couldn't be forced through standard methods. Some information only came through cooperation, not coercion. Frost activated his helmet's medical scanner with a subtle eye movement. The readout appeared in his visor display. The results made him pause. Beneath the blue skin and alien physiology, the structural similarities were startling. Bipedal framework, bilateral symmetry, organ placement that followed logical patterns. The differences were surface-level adaptations. Cold resistance, pigment variations, minor skeletal reinforcements. At the core, they shared common biological foundations. This wasn't some radically alien life form. The scans showed evolutionary paths that might have diverged from similar origins. Frost reconsidered everything he'd been taught about the cryonites. They weren't monsters or incomprehensible aliens. They were soldiers from a harsh world, shaped by their environment just as humans had been shaped by theirs. The biological commonality suggested connections between their species that went deeper than current conflicts. His perspective shifted. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She represented potential, intelligence, cultural insight, maybe even a path toward understanding this war differently. Frost made a decision. He'd treat this as an opportunity rather than a standard capture. The risks were high, but the potential rewards felt greater. Vela watched him, her violet eyes missing nothing. She seemed to understand the calculations happening behind his visor. When she spoke again, her voice carried new weight. "My people are planning a push toward the southern ice plains," she said. "They're moving heavy artillery through the glacial passes under cover of the coming storms." The information landed like a physical blow. Frost's mind raced through the implications. The southern approach was considered impregnable. Sheer ice walls, constant avalanches, no viable paths for large-scale movement. If her people had found a way through, the entire defensive line would collapse. Outposts would be overrun, supply routes severed. This changed everything. Standard prisoner processing would have taken hours, maybe days to extract this intelligence. By then, the tactical advantage would be lost. Her voluntary disclosure shifted the situation from simple captivity to strategic partnership. Frost felt the weight of command decisions settling on him. He needed to relay this information immediately, but he also needed to maintain this fragile connection. The warrior kneeling before him had just become the most valuable asset on this frozen battlefield. Vela remained kneeling in the snow, her violet eyes holding Frost's gaze. She began explaining the deeper meaning behind her initial words. The wind whipped around them, but her voice remained steady. On Cryonis, she said, survival depends on recognizing genuine trust. Their world's extreme conditions make vulnerability a calculated risk rather than a weakness. The bed-warming offer wasn't about intimacy as humans understood it. It represented something far more significant in her culture. Shared warmth means complete vulnerability in life-threatening conditions. When cryonites offer to warm another's bed, they're offering to lower all defenses. They're demonstrating trust by putting themselves in a position where they could be easily harmed. The gesture says, I believe you won't take advantage of my vulnerability. It's the highest form of cultural surrender that isn't actually defeat. It's an invitation to build something new. This contrasts sharply with human concepts of personal space and intimacy. Where humans might see sexual implication, cryonites see profound trust building. Frost listened, the cold seeping through his armor. He began understanding the gesture as purely cultural, completely divorced from personal or sexual meaning. The offer wasn't about him as an individual. It was about what he represented, the opposing force, the potential enemy who might become an ally. He realized his initial reaction, his instinctive rejection of the proposal, would have been a profound insult in her culture. It would have signaled complete rejection of trust building, a refusal to consider any relationship beyond hostility. The cultural gap between them had nearly caused catastrophic misunderstanding. Frost thought about how close he'd come to following standard engagement protocols. He'd nearly treated her offer as some strange combat trick or psychological warfare. The potential for disaster felt immense now that he understood the cultural weight behind her words. A simple misinterpretation could have destroyed any chance of communication between their species. Vela explained how this tradition developed over centuries of Cryonis's harsh environment. Written agreements meant nothing when temperatures could drop suddenly and kill entire communities. Physical gestures of trust became the only reliable way to seal alliances. The bed-warming ritual evolved as the ultimate test of goodwill between conflicting groups. Both parties had to demonstrate complete vulnerability to prove their intentions were genuine. Frost considered human customs of handshakes, signed treaties, and formal ceremonies. None required the physical risk and vulnerability of Vela's culture. Humans built trust through words and documents protected by comfortable surroundings. Cryonites built trust through actions that risked everything in brutal conditions. The difference in approach reflected their different evolutionary paths. One species developed in relative safety, the other in constant environmental threat. Understanding this cultural context became essential to their alliance. Frost realized that without this explanation, he would have continued viewing Vela through human cultural lenses. He would have misinterpreted her actions, her offers, her entire way of building trust. The knowledge shifted his perspective fundamentally. He saw now that her initial proposal was the most sincere peace offering her culture could make. It represented willingness to risk everything for potential understanding between their peoples. The wind howled across the icy plain, but Frost felt something shift between them. The cultural misunderstanding that could have meant continued hostility instead became a bridge. Vela's offer to warm his bed carried weight and meaning he now respected. It wasn't about intimacy. It was about survival through trust. That understanding became the foundation everything else would build upon. Vela lifted her head, the wind catching strands of her white hair. She proposed the plan with calm precision, each word measured. They would infiltrate the Voidsec stronghold together. Frost would play the captured human officer. Bound and subdued, she would present him as her prisoner, proof of her loyalty to their cause. The deception needed to be perfect from the first moment to the last. The role required Frost to appear completely defeated, weapons confiscated, armor damaged, the posture of a broken soldier. Every detail mattered. The Voidsec would be watching for inconsistencies. For any sign this was anything but a genuine capture, Frost would have to surrender control completely, trusting Vela to maintain the illusion while surrounded by enemies. The risk calculation was stark. Discovery meant immediate execution for both of them. No negotiations, no prisoner exchange. Certain death. Frost considered the variables. He'd be entering a hostile facility without weapons, without backup, without any means of communication. His survival would depend entirely on Vela's ability to convince her people he was truly her captive. He'd have to endure whatever treatment prisoners received, maintaining his role under duress. The physical danger was immense, but the psychological pressure would be worse. Playing helpless went against every instinct he'd developed as a soldier. Vela would face equal risk. She'd be presenting herself as a turncoat, a cryonite warrior who had captured a human officer to prove her loyalty to the sect. If they suspected her true motives, her fate would be as certain as his. The plan demanded perfect synchronization between them, unspoken cues, subtle signals, absolute trust despite their recent enemy status. One misstep, one hesitation, and the entire deception would collapse. The potential intelligence gain justified the danger. Access to the Void Sect's leadership could reveal who was manipulating the war and why. They might learn the true objectives behind the conflict, information that could end the fighting entirely. Frost weighed the lives that might be saved against the 2 lives risked in this operation. The math was clear, but the personal cost felt heavy. He looked at Vela, remembering their first encounter on the battlefield. They'd been aiming weapons at each other just hours earlier. Now he was considering trusting her with his life in the most dangerous scenario imaginable. The alliance between them was still new, untested under real pressure. This mission would either strengthen it or destroy it completely. Frost made his decision. He would take the role. The chance to uncover the truth about the Void Sect was worth the risk. He began preparing mentally, shifting into the mindset of a captured officer. The posture, the defeated expression, the subtle body language of someone who had been overcome in battle. It felt foreign, uncomfortable, but necessary. Vela watched him transition into character. Her violet eyes showed approval. She began adjusting her own demeanor, shifting from ally to captor. Her stance became more aggressive. Her voice took on a harder edge. The transformation was startling. She looked every bit the fierce cryonite warrior who had defeated a human soldier in combat. They rehearsed the story they would tell. How she tracked him, how the fight unfolded, how she finally subdued him. The details needed to withstand scrutiny from experienced interrogators. Frost provided authentic touches from human military procedures that would make the account convincing. Vela added cryonite combat nuances that sold her role as the victor. The preparation felt like planning a performance, but the stakes were life and death. They would have one chance to get this right. The Void Sect stronghold awaited, a place of unknown dangers and certain hostility. Their survival depended on maintaining the deception under the most extreme scrutiny either of them had ever faced. The gambit was set. The players were ready. The curtain was about to rise on the most dangerous role of their lives. Base Director Savona's voice crackled over the emergency channel with clipped urgency. Protocol whiteout initiated. All personnel brace for system reset. Frost felt the vibration through the deck plates as the base's power grid cycled down. Lights flickered, died, then returned at half strength. The security systems went silent. For 90 seconds, the entire facility would be running on emergency backup, creating a narrow window of vulnerability. Doors that should have sealed shut instead hung open or cycled erratically. Frost moved quickly, Vela matching his pace. They navigated through corridors filled with confused personnel. Some tried to manually secure hatches while others clustered around failing terminals. The chaos worked in their favor. Nobody questioned 2 figures moving with purpose through the malfunctioning base. They reached the outer perimeter, just as the main generators began their restart sequence. The energy barrier that should have sealed the exit flickered and dropped for 3 heartbeats. Frost didn't hesitate. He moved through the gap, Vela right behind him. Then they were outside, exposed to Cryonis's full brutality. The temperature hit like a physical blow. Frost's armor registered the drop immediately. External sensors warned of frostbite risk within 5 minutes of exposure to unprotected skin. The wind drove ice crystals that stung where they found purchase. Visibility dropped to mere meters as the whiteout conditions intensified. Vela took the lead without discussion. Her people had evolved for this environment. Where Frost saw a featureless white hell, she saw navigation markers in the ice formations. She moved with certainty, her blue skin somehow less affected by the biting cold. Frost followed, trusting her knowledge over his technology. His helmet display flickered with conflicting data as the magnetic fields interfered with sensors. Vela seemed to sense those same fields naturally, adjusting their path without consulting instruments. She used ice formations as waypoints, reading the landscape like a map written in a language only her people understood. They had minimal supplies, emergency rations, a basic medical kit, survival gear that felt inadequate against this level of cold. Frost calculated their chances. Without shelter, they wouldn't last the night. The human body couldn't endure these temperatures for long. Already he felt the cold seeping through his armor's insulation. Vela pointed toward a ridge line barely visible through the blowing snow. She explained about ice caves carved by ancient glaciers. Some served as temporary shelters for her people during storms. They offered protection from the wind and slightly warmer conditions than the open landscape. Getting there would require crossing exposed terrain. The shared hardship forged something between them that speeches and negotiations never could. Frost saw Vela's expertise in action, her ability to read the environment that would have killed him without her guidance. She saw his discipline, his steady movement despite the conditions that should have crippled a human. They reached the ice cave as the light began to fail. The temperature inside was still brutally cold, but out of the wind it felt almost tolerable. Frost checked his supplies while Vela secured the entrance against drifting snow. They worked together without needing to discuss roles or methods. The desperate escape through the frozen wilderness accelerated their trust beyond cultural barriers. Survival had demanded they rely on each other's strengths without hesitation. The bond formed in those hours of shared struggle felt more solid than any treaty or agreement. They had faced death together and chosen cooperation over individual survival. The experience stripped away remaining doubts. Frost knew he could trust Vela with his life. She had proven it through action, not words. The alliance between them became personal, cemented by mutual reliance in the face of Cryonis's unforgiving environment. They had started as enemy soldiers, become uneasy allies, and now stood as partners forged in ice and necessity. The ice cave entrance appeared as a darker shadow against the glacier's blue-white face. Vela moved toward it without hesitation, her form blending with the shifting snow. Frost followed, his movements slower, more deliberate. The transition from screaming wind to relative silence felt sudden, almost disorienting. The cave walls curved inward, forming a natural chamber that offered real protection from the killing cold outside. The temperature inside remained brutally low, but the absence of wind made all the difference. Frost's armor sensors registered the improvement immediately. The space felt ancient, carved by glaciers that had retreated millennia ago. Translucent walls refracted what little light penetrated the entrance, creating a soft azure glow that seemed to pulse with the storm's rhythm. The air held a stillness that felt both peaceful and isolating. Vela began demonstrating her people's survival techniques. She showed Frost how to position themselves to maximize shared body heat, how to create insulation from their limited supplies, how to breathe in patterns that conserved warmth. The methods felt alien but practical, born from generations of surviving in conditions that would kill unprepared humans within hours. Her movements were economical, precise, showing exactly what needed to be done without unnecessary flourishes. The closeness required for effective warmth forced intimacy beyond cultural comfort zones. They had to press together, back to chest, sharing body heat through layers of clothing and armor. Frost felt the strangeness of it, this physical proximity with someone who had been his enemy hours earlier. His training warned about vulnerability, about maintaining personal space. Her cultural background made this normal, necessary. The contrast created tension that had nothing to do with the cold. As the storm continued outside, they settled into the forced confinement. The long hours stretched before them, dark and silent except for the wind's distant howl. Frost found himself speaking first, telling Vela about his military background. He spoke of training, of honorable service, of the code that guided his decisions. The words came easier in the darkness, with only the blue glow of ice surrounding them. Vela listened, then shared her own story. She spoke of her family on Cryonis, of traditions that valued community survival above individual glory. Her reasons for opposing the Void Sect became clear. They threatened the very fabric of her people's way of life. She described faction leaders who put power above their people's welfare, who embraced outside manipulation for personal gain. Her opposition wasn't political, it was personal, rooted in protecting what mattered most. The shared vulnerability changed something between them. Strategic alliance became genuine connection. They weren't just soldier and warrior negotiating terms. They were two individuals who had seen behind each other's cultural masks. Frost understood her motivations now, saw the person behind the blue skin and violet eyes. She comprehended his honor code, recognized the values that drove his choices. The physical closeness became their lifeline, transcending cultural differences. Where human intimacy often developed through conversation and shared experiences, theirs formed through survival necessity. The ice cave became where warrior and soldier became true allies. The transformation happened quietly, without ceremony, in the blue-lit darkness of that glacial sanctuary. They emerged from the storm changed, bonded by shared vulnerability and mutual understanding that went deeper than any strategic agreement. They moved under cover of the magnetic storm, its interference masking their approach. The southern outpost appeared as a dark scar against the mountain's icy face. Frost's sensors struggled to penetrate the energy distortion surrounding the facility. What they could see suggested technology far beyond standard cryonite capabilities. The structures were integrated into the mountain itself, their design showing sophistication that didn't match known cryonite engineering. They found a vantage point overlooking the main compound. The scene below made Frost's training-honed instincts tighten. Human and cryonite personnel moved together through secured areas. They shared workstations, communicated openly, coordinated operations. This collaboration defied every official briefing about the war. The two species weren't supposed to be working together. They were supposed to be trying to destroy each other. Through a reinforced viewport, they observed a meeting chamber. Void sect elders in distinctive robes conferred with human officers wearing coalition insignia. The body language showed familiarity, not the tension of enemies forced to negotiate. These were partners discussing shared objectives. The collaboration proved both governments were being manipulated by forces operating outside official channels. The outpost served as a nexus for the broader conspiracy. Frost watched supply transfers that shouldn't be happening, technology exchanges that violated war protocols, communication networks that bypassed standard military channels. This wasn't just a hidden base. It was the operational center for whoever was pulling strings on both sides of the conflict. Security protocols showed advanced awareness of infiltration risks. Energy barriers pulsed with unfamiliar frequencies. Surveillance drones patrolled with patterns that covered blind spots human security typically missed. Access points used biometric systems that combined human and cryonite technology. The protection measures indicated they knew someone might come looking for the truth. The risk level increased with every moment of observation. Frost documented everything: communication logs, personnel movements, technology signatures. Each piece of evidence tightened the noose around their operation. Discovery would mean facing security forces from both species, with no backup and no hope of rescue. Vela pointed out structural details that confirmed the outpost's purpose. The mountain had been hollowed out to house something massive beneath the surface. Energy readings pulsed through the rock, suggesting power generation on a scale that dwarfed standard military installations. This was more than a meeting place. It was the heart of the operation. They observed Void Sect members directing both human and cryonite workers. The chain of command clearly flowed through the sect, not through official military structures. Frost recognized several human officers who were supposed to be leading frontline operations against the cryonites. Instead, they were here, coordinating with the enemy they were supposed to be fighting. The revelation reframed the war's true architecture. This wasn't a conflict between two expanding civilizations. It was a manipulated scenario, engineered to serve someone else's objectives. The southern outpost stood as proof that both sides were pawns in a larger game. The discovery confirmed the existence of the hidden manipulation network that Vela had described. Frost felt the weight of the conspiracy settling around them. The outpost represented resources and organization far beyond what any rogue element should possess. Whoever controlled this facility had access to advanced technology, loyal personnel from both species, and the ability to manipulate two governments simultaneously. The scale of the deception was staggering. They withdrew as the magnetic storm began to weaken. The evidence they'd gathered changed everything. The war needed to be stopped, but not by defeating the cryonites. The real enemy was here in this mountain, playing both sides against each other. Frost understood now that victory wouldn't come on the battlefield. It would come from exposing this truth to both their peoples. Vela spoke softly, her words carrying weight beyond their volume. The Void Sect's true objective lay deep beneath Cryonis's frozen surface. They had uncovered something ancient, something powerful that predated both their civilizations. The energy source pulsed with potential that dwarfed anything either species possessed. Its discovery changed everything about the conflict raging above ground. The war served as perfect cover for their real work. While humans and cryonites fought over mining rights and territory, the sect focused on extraction. They needed the distraction, the chaos, the diverted attention. The surface conflict provided ideal conditions for their operations. Nobody questioned unusual energy signatures when battle reports flooded communication channels. The scale of their discovery made the mining conflict seem trivial by comparison. Weaponization posed an existential threat. The energy could potentially destroy both civilizations if harnessed improperly. Regional space would undergo changes impossible to predict or control. The sect seemed willing to risk everything for this power. Their ambition overshadowed any concern for collateral damage. The ancient technology represented a force neither species understood, yet they rushed to turn it into a weapon. The chamber housing the power source felt both sacred and dangerous. Void sect elders moved with reverence around the massive crystalline formation. Human collaborators stood beside them, their coalition uniforms stark against the blue glow. The space had been carved from the mountain's heart, ice removed to reveal the structure beneath. Azure energy pulsed through the crystal in rhythms that defied physics. The light seemed alive, aware, ancient beyond comprehension. The scale of what they faced became clear. This wasn't about winning a war between species. It was about preventing catastrophe that would consume everyone. The mining conflict that had cost so many lives was merely background noise to the real danger. The ancient power source threatened to rewrite reality itself if mishandled. Its potential for destruction outweighed any strategic advantage either side might gain from continued fighting. Bela explained how the sect believed this technology would make them rulers of their world and beyond. They saw themselves as chosen inheritors of power left by beings who came before. Their religious fervor combined with technological ambition created a dangerous determination. They would risk everything to control this energy, regardless of the consequences for others. The belief in their right to this power made them relentless. Frost understood the new mission parameters now. Stopping the weaponization became their primary objective. The war between their peoples needed to end, but first they had to prevent this greater threat. The ancient power source represented danger beyond any battlefield. Its misuse could erase everything both species had built. The responsibility felt immense, the stakes impossible to calculate. They watched from their hidden vantage point as sect members continued their work. The collaboration between human and cryonite technicians showed how deeply the conspiracy ran. This wasn't just a few rogue elements. It was an organized effort with resources and coordination that spanned both militaries. The scale of the operation suggested planning that had been underway for years, perhaps longer. The azure energy pulsed rhythmically, its light reflecting in the ice walls. The chamber felt like a cathedral built around something too powerful to comprehend. Frost recognized the danger of weaponizing technology nobody understood. The sect's confidence seemed reckless against the unknown nature of what they were handling. Their ambition outstripped their understanding, a combination that historically led to disaster. Preventing the weaponization became their shared mission. Everything else, the war, the cultural differences, the personal risks, faded against this larger threat. They had to stop the sect from activating whatever they were building. The consequences of failure were too catastrophic to consider. The ancient power source beneath Crayonis demanded their complete focus now. Survival depended on understanding something neither of their civilizations had created. Blackwell worked at the control interface with feverish intensity. His fingers moved across alien symbols he didn't fully understand. The ancient device responded with deep vibrations that shook the chamber floor. Energy readings spiked beyond safe parameters. Crystalline structures glowed with dangerous intensity. The system wasn't designed for weaponization. It reacted unpredictably to forced manipulation. The energy fluctuations threatened catastrophic failure. Deep rumbling echoed through the mountain. Ice crystals fell from the ceiling as the vibrations increased. Sensor readings showed stress building in the planetary crust. The ancient technology was destabilizing, its energy patterns spiraling out of control. The threat went beyond the chamber. Cryonis's core integrity was at risk. Frost moved toward the control interface. His human technical understanding provided one approach. He recognized energy patterns, control sequences, system feedback loops. The technology felt alien, but followed certain universal principles. He worked to reroute power, to establish stability through mechanical solutions. His methods were logical, systematic, based on years of technical training. Vela approached from the other side. Her knowledge came from cultural understanding, not technical manuals. She recognized symbols from her people's ancient dialect. The interface responded to symbolic patterns, not just energy manipulation. She traced shapes that represented balance, harmony, stability in her culture's oldest traditions. Her approach was intuitive, cultural, rooted in generations of understanding. Their methods represented different ways of problem-solving. Frost's technological approach and Vela's cultural understanding complemented each other. Where his technical solutions met resistance, her symbolic patterns opened new pathways. When her cultural symbols failed to register, his technical adjustments created openings. They worked in tandem, communicating through gestures and shared purpose. The combined effort demonstrated cross-species collaboration at its most effective. They weren't just two individuals working separately. They were integrating their approaches into something greater. Frost would adjust energy flows while Vela traced stabilizing symbols. The system responded to this dual input, its violent fluctuations beginning to calm. The cooperation showed what their species could achieve together. The final stabilization required complete integration. Frost placed his hand on one control surface, Vela her blue hand on another. Their life energies merged with the system, creating a feedback loop that calmed the raging energies. The amber of human biology met the blue of cryonite essence within the ancient technology. The system recognized this combination, responding to the union of their species. The energy patterns harmonized, moving from violent spikes to steady rhythms. The threat to the planetary core receded as stability returned. The chamber stopped shaking, the falling ice crystals ceasing their dangerous rain. The ancient device settled into its natural state, its power properly channeled once more. The catastrophic weapons test had been prevented through cooperation rather than force. Their successful cooperation proved the power of alliance over conflict. Where Blackwell's greedy manipulation had nearly destroyed everything, their trust-based approach saved both their civilizations. The outcome validated their decision to work together despite being recent enemies. It demonstrated that empathy and courage could overcome even the most advanced technology when wielded without understanding. The chamber grew quiet, except for the steady hum of properly channeled energy. Frost and Vela remained at the controls, their hands still in place. The crisis had passed, but the understanding remained. Their species didn't need to fight over this technology. They needed to understand it together. The ancient power source seemed to approve, its energy pulsing gently in recognition of their harmonious cooperation. Their energy signatures began to merge where their hands touched the ancient controls. Amber human energy and blue cryonite essence flowed together, creating something new. The fusion formed a harmonized field that spread through the system. The violent energy spikes calmed immediately. The destruction sequence halted as the harmonization took effect. The chamber stopped shaking, the dangerous vibrations ceasing their threat. The ancient device responded to their combined biological signatures. It recognized the union of human and cryonite essence as valid input. The system accepted their dual control where it had rejected Blackwell's forced manipulation. The interface glowed with steady light instead of frantic pulsations. The energy pattern stabilized into sustainable rhythms that felt natural, balanced. The design revealed its true purpose through this response. The technology appeared created for multi-species operation from its origins. Control surfaces accommodated different hand shapes and sizes. Interface symbols incorporated elements that both species could understand. The system seemed to welcome their combined presence, responding more smoothly to dual input than individual manipulation. The successful stabilization proved collaboration was the intended use all along. The ancient builders had designed this technology for shared operation, not singular control. Their trust-based approach validated the system's original purpose. Where force and greed had failed, cooperation succeeded. The outcome demonstrated that manipulation was never meant to work here. Blackwell fell back from the controls, his face showing shock and disbelief. His attempt to force weaponization had backfired completely. The system rejected his greedy approach, responding only to harmonious cooperation. His fate demonstrated the failure of manipulation versus genuine collaboration. He became a lesson in what happened when ambition outstripped understanding. The power source transitioned from potential weapon to shared asset. The dangerous energy pulses became stable power flows. The threat of planetary destruction receded into manageable energy management. The ancient technology settled into its natural state, ready for proper use rather than abuse. Its purpose shifted from destruction to preservation under their care. The outcome validated their trust-based approach over manipulation. Frost's decision to spare Vela on the battlefield, his refusal to exploit her cultural offer, their choice to work together, all led to this moment. The successful stabilization proved that empathy and courage could overcome even ancient technology designed by unknown builders. Their method worked where force had failed. The energy harmonization demonstrated transformative collaboration between species. Human and cryonite abilities complemented each other perfectly. Technical understanding combined with cultural knowledge created solutions neither could achieve alone. The fusion of their energies represented the potential of their alliance, something greater than either species could accomplish separately. This successful stabilization marked the turning point in the conflict. The immediate threat was neutralized, but more importantly, the method of its resolution changed everything. They had proven that cooperation worked where confrontation failed. The lesson would resonate through both their civilizations. The way forward became clear, not through fighting but through understanding how to work together. The chamber hummed with stable energy, the azure glow now gentle and consistent. Frost and Vela maintained contact with the controls, their hands still generating the harmonized field. The system seemed to approve of their partnership, responding with smooth energy flows that felt right, balanced, proper. The dangerous weapon had become a shared responsibility, a symbol of what their species could achieve together, rather than against each other. Coalition dropships descended through the thinning storm clouds, their engines cutting through the wind's howl. Admiral Anzari stepped onto the ice, her uniform crisp against the battered landscape. She moved through the chaos with calm authority, assessing the situation with fresh eyes unclouded by frontline combat experience. Her arrival brought order to the confusion, her presence immediately altering the dynamics of the outpost. She examined the evidence Frost and Vela presented, recordings of void sect operations, energy readings from the ancient device, documentation of human cryonite collaboration that defied official war narratives. The scale of manipulation became clear under her objective scrutiny. Her perspective, developed far from daily combat pressures, allowed her to see patterns others had missed. She recognized this wasn't just a military situation, it was political, cultural, and strategic on multiple levels. The ancient technology discovery changed everything. Anzari understood its implications immediately. Weaponization threatened both civilizations regardless of who controlled it. The Void Sect's manipulation reframed the entire conflict. This wasn't about winning a war anymore, it was about preventing catastrophe and exposing truth. Strategic priorities shifted from military victory to damage control and alliance building. She recognized the opportunity for genuine peace. The collaboration between Frost and Vela demonstrated that cooperation was possible. Their successful stabilization of the ancient device proved that trust worked where force failed. Anzari saw this as the foundation for something new, a relationship built on mutual interest rather than conflict. The potential outweighed any tactical advantage continuing the war might provide. Her authority allowed decisive action. She overrode previous conflict directives with clear commands. Stand-down orders went out to all units. Communication channels opened that had been closed for months. The military machine that had been grinding forward suddenly shifted into neutral. The change felt seismic to those who had been fighting for so long. She initiated diplomatic overtures to cryonite leadership outside the Void Sect. Using secured channels that bypassed compromised networks, she reached commanders who had been kept in the dark about the manipulation. Her messages emphasized common threats over historical conflicts. She framed the situation as mutual survival against hidden manipulators, rather than interspecies competition. The political landscape began shifting toward cooperation. Military officials on both sides started communicating directly for the first time. The shared threat of the ancient technology's misuse created common ground where none existed before. The Void Sect's exposure turned allies into enemies and enemies into potential partners. Everything realigned around the new reality Anzari helped reveal. Her intervention created the possibility for lasting peace. Where previous efforts had focused on victory or surrender, she offered collaboration. The ancient technology became a shared responsibility, rather than a prize to be won. The war's narrative changed from conflict between species to alliance against manipulation. This reframing allowed both sides to save face while moving toward something better. Anzari's fresh perspective proved crucial. She wasn't invested in the conflict's existing narratives or grudges. She could see the bigger picture, the wasted resources, the unnecessary deaths, the manipulated hostilities. Her authority let her act on that understanding without being constrained by tradition or expectation. She made decisions based on what needed to happen rather than what usually happened. The atmosphere at the outpost transformed under her leadership. Tension gave way to purposeful activity. Human and cryonite personnel began working together openly. Their collaboration now sanctioned rather than secret. The shift felt palpable, less like a battlefield and more like a difficult but necessary partnership. Anzari's arrival had changed the entire political landscape of the war in hours. The ancient chamber underwent a complete transformation. Researchers from both species worked side by side, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Where once stood weaponization equipment, now stood analysis stations and containment fields. The space that nearly witnessed catastrophe became a place of study and preservation. The change felt physical, palpable in the air itself. Human and cryonite scientists shared methodologies without hesitation. They combined technological approaches with cultural understanding. White-coated researchers consulted blue-skinned experts across workstations. The collaboration felt natural now, the initial awkwardness replaced by professional respect. They moved through the chamber with shared purpose, their differences becoming strengths rather than barriers. The approach shifted fundamentally from weaponization to understanding. Containment fields hummed where energy weapons once charged. Sensors monitored the ancient power source's natural rhythms instead of testing destructive capabilities. The focus became preservation and study rather than exploitation. This change in priority reflected the larger transformation between their species. Breakthroughs came through combined efforts. Human technical precision complemented cryonite intuitive understanding. They discovered energy patterns neither could have identified alone. The ancient technology revealed its secrets to their collaborative approach. Each discovery built upon the last, accelerating their understanding exponentially. The facility became a symbol of potential realized. Where enemies once plotted mutual destruction, allies now pursued shared knowledge. The chamber's transformation mirrored their own journey from conflict to cooperation. The space represented what their species could achieve together, rather than against each other. Former soldiers now worked as research assistants. Warriors became laboratory technicians. The skills that once served combat now served science. The transition felt natural for many, their discipline and precision transferring well to research work. The facility employed personnel from both militaries, giving them new purpose beyond conflict. The cooperative science mission replaced destructive conflict entirely. Research teams worked shifts around the clock, their schedules coordinated across species. The facility operated with efficiency that military operations had never achieved. The shared goal of understanding created unity where division once ruled. The ancient power source responded positively to their approach. Its energy patterns stabilized further under their careful study. The technology seemed to welcome their respectful attention after nearly being abused for weaponization. The harmony between researchers and subject felt palpable in the chamber's air. Cultural exchange became part of daily operations. Scientists shared meals along with data. Break times included conversations about homeworlds and traditions. The professional collaboration fostered personal understanding that strengthened their work. The facility became a living example of peaceful coexistence. Security measures focused on protection rather than defense. The safeguards ensured the technology remained stable and contained. The approach was about preservation rather than preventing enemy access. The change in mindset reflected their new relationship with the ancient power source. The joint facility stood as proof that transformation was possible. The chamber that once housed Inmo now housed hope. The researchers working within represented the best of both species: curiosity, discipline, and willingness to understand rather than destroy. Their work demonstrated that cooperation produced better results than conflict ever could. The energy in the chamber felt different now, not the violent potential of weaponization, but the steady hum of discovery. Scientists moved with quiet purpose, their collaboration feeling natural and right. The facility had become what the ancient builders might have intended, a place of shared learning and mutual growth. The destructive conflict had been replaced by something lasting and meaningful. Base Command's response crackled through Frost's comms with clinical precision. The voice was calm, detached, utterly devoid of the moral weight Frost felt settling on his shoulders. They acknowledged the intelligence value of his prisoner. Then they issued the order that made his stomach tighten. They wanted him to exploit the cultural offer, to pretend interest in Vela's proposal to gain deeper access to her knowledge. The suggestion felt like a physical blow. Frost stood motionless, the cold suddenly biting deeper than before. This wasn't intelligence gathering. This was manipulation. It violated every principle of honor he'd built his military service upon. The coalition trained soldiers to fight with integrity, to respect prisoners, to maintain ethical boundaries even in conflict. Now Command was asking him to use a cultural gesture of trust as a tool for deception. Frost felt the ground shift beneath his boots. The firm foundation of military doctrine crumbled into something slippery and uncertain. Vela watched him, her violet eyes missing nothing. She continued pressing her case for broader cultural exchange between their peoples. She spoke of shared knowledge, mutual survival, the possibility of understanding rather than destroying. Her words tested whether Frost could extend trust beyond the narrow rules of engagement. She was offering bridge building while his superiors demanded manipulation. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Frost's hesitation grew with each passing moment. He recognized the calculation behind Command's order. They saw Vela as an asset to be exploited, her culture as leverage to be manipulated. The cold efficiency of it made him question everything he thought he knew about the Coalition's values. This wasn't the honorable fight he'd signed up for. This was something darker, something that smelled of desperation and moral compromise. The conflict became intensely personal. Duty demanded he follow orders. Integrity demanded he refuse. Frost weighed the consequences of disobedience against the cost of betraying the fragile trust he'd built with Vela. He thought about the soldiers who might die without the intelligence he could gather. Then he thought about the larger cost of winning through deception rather than understanding. Vela's steady gaze never wavered. She seemed to sense his internal struggle. Trust cannot be built on false foundations, she said quietly. It either exists between living beings or it does not. Her words cut through the military calculations like a laser through ice. She was testing him, pushing him to choose between following orders and building something genuine. Frost made his decision. He would not pretend interest in her cultural offer. He would not manipulate her trust. The order from Command created his first real doubt about the war itself. If the Coalition was willing to cross these ethical lines, what did that say about their cause? What did it say about the enemy they claimed to be fighting? He keyed his comms. Unable to comply with that order, he said, his voice flat. Maintaining current approach. The words hung in the cold air, a small act of defiance that felt enormous. He'd chosen moral integrity over blind duty. The institutional willingness to exploit cultural differences had backfired, creating doubt where there should have been certainty. Vela gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. She understood what had just happened. The trust between them solidified in that moment, forged not through manipulation but through Frost's refusal to manipulate. The ethical boundary had been tested and Frost had chosen the harder path. It felt like the first real victory he'd had in this frozen war. Vela's hands remained open on her knees, the blue skin stark against the white snow. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. The information she shared didn't match any intelligence Frost had studied about cryonite strategy. Her people weren't the unified war machine the briefings described. There were fractures in their command structure, divisions that went deeper than tactical disagreements. She spoke of factions within her government, voices that argued against this war. Some leaders pushed for continued aggression while others advocated withdrawal. The conflict wasn't as straightforward as human forces had been told. Then she mentioned external influences, shadowy figures who moved between the factions. whispering suggestions that always led to escalation. The name emerged quietly, almost lost in the wind. The Void Sect. Frost's internal database search returned nothing. Coalition intelligence had no record of such a group. Vela described them as intermediaries who brought offers of advanced technology, strategic advice, always with conditions that required more fighting, more commitment to the conflict. Their objectives seemed separate from the official mining rights dispute that supposedly started this war. Vela suggested something that made Frost's training-honed instincts tighten. Both sides were being manipulated. The prolonged conflict served someone else's interests. The battles that had cost so many lives might be orchestrated events in a larger game nobody understood. The realization settled like ice in Frost's veins. He recalled battlefield anomalies that never made sense. Cryonite attacks that achieved little tactical gain but caused maximum casualties. Human counterstrikes that somehow missed key infrastructure. The patterns felt off, like a script being followed rather than actual combat. Frost had dismissed these as intelligence failures or command errors. Now he wondered if they were something else entirely. The revelation reframed everything. This wasn't just a resource war between two expanding species. It might be a manufactured conflict engineered by a third party, for reasons still unknown. Frost's mind raced through the implications. The official reasons for their presence on Cryonis, mineral rights, strategic positioning, defense against aggression, might be cover stories for something darker. He began questioning everything. The intelligence briefings that always emphasized cryonite brutality. The constant escalation that never led to resolution. The convenient timing of attacks that prevented diplomatic overtures. It all fit a pattern of manipulation rather than genuine conflict. Frost felt the ground of his understanding shift beneath him. The war he'd been fighting might be someone else's design. Vela watched him process this. Her violet eyes held no triumph, only sober recognition. She'd known this truth for some time, living with the weight of understanding that her people were being used as pawns. The hidden third party had been pulling strings from the shadows, playing both sides against each other. The intelligence completely recontextualized Frost's understanding of the conflict. This wasn't about winning a war anymore. It was about uncovering who started it and why. The cold air felt different now. The battlefield around them seemed like a stage set for a performance neither of them had chosen to join. Frost looked at the wreckage, the frozen bodies, the cost of this manipulation. The anger that rose was cold and precise. He'd been fighting the wrong enemy. The real threat wasn't kneeling before him in the snow. It was somewhere in the shadows, pulling strings and laughing at the carnage it had created. The war had just become something entirely different. Frost and Vela stood together in the research chamber, watching scientists from both species work around the stabilized power source. Their partnership had evolved beyond strategic necessity into something more substantial. The trust built through shared danger had become genuine connection. They moved together through the facility with unspoken coordination, their actions synchronized from months of relying on each other for survival. They had faced extreme situations that tested every limit. The ice cave survival, the infiltration mission, the weaponization crisis. Each experience proved their reliability through action rather than words. Frost knew Vela would cover his blind spots without being asked. She understood his thought processes before he spoke. This trust felt earned through concrete experience, not abstract agreement. Their cultural differences became assets rather than obstacles. Frost's human technical approach complemented Vela's intuitive understanding of the ancient technology. Where he saw system architecture, she recognized symbolic patterns. Their contrasting perspectives solved problems neither could address alone. The synergy between their ways of thinking created solutions that surprised even the research teams. Frost openly embraced this new approach. He set aside military protocols that emphasized suspicion and control. His future planning now included trust as a foundation rather than exploitation as a tool. This shift felt significant but natural, built on demonstrated reliability rather than blind faith. He recognized that cooperation produced better results than confrontation ever had. Vela's role transformed completely. The warrior became diplomat and cultural liaison. Her understanding of both species made her invaluable for building bridges. She explained cryonite customs to human researchers and human procedures to cryonite technicians. Her transition felt seamless, her combat skills adapting to diplomatic challenges with the same precision. Their personal journey mirrored the larger political changes around them. The facility's transformation from weapon site to research center reflected their own evolution from enemies to partners. The cooperation between species happening throughout the outpost echoed the trust they had built through personal experience. Their relationship became a working model of the peace both sides sought. This arc from battlefield opponents to co-stewards demonstrated empathy's practical power. Understanding each other's perspectives allowed them to find common ground where conflict once seemed inevitable. Their ability to see beyond cultural barriers created solutions that benefited everyone. The personal connection forged in crisis became the foundation for professional collaboration. The reconciliation completed their individual transformations. Frost became more than a soldier following orders. He became someone who questioned, considered, chose trust over suspicion. Vela evolved beyond a warrior defending her people. She became a bridge builder, someone who could see solutions where others saw only opposition. They stood together watching the research team's work. The chamber hummed with productive energy rather than destructive potential. Frost glanced at Vela, remembering their first meeting on the frozen battlefield. The distance between that moment and this one felt immense but right. The journey had been difficult but necessary. Their partnership proved that individuals could change the course of conflicts. The choice to spare a life, to listen rather than shoot, to trust rather than suspect. These decisions created ripples that transformed everything. The personal reconciliation between them showed that empathy could overcome even deeply entrenched hostility when given a chance to work. The research facility operated smoothly around them, a testament to what their species could achieve together. Frost and Vela remained at the center of this transformation, their personal bond strengthening the professional collaboration. They had started as enemies aiming weapons at each other. They ended as partners protecting something greater than themselves. The completion of their character arcs felt both personal and universally significant, a demonstration that change was always possible when people chose understanding over conflict. The formal treaty ratification process began in the main research chamber, where the ancient power source now pulsed with stable energy. Representatives from both governments stood together, their formal attire contrasting with the facility's functional surroundings. The documents contained language that acknowledged the void sex manipulation openly. This admission felt significant, not just ending hostilities but explaining why they should never have started. The agreement made the hidden conspiracy part of official record, ensuring future generations would understand what really happened. The treaty ended all military engagements immediately. Stand-down orders went out across both networks simultaneously. Soldiers who had been preparing for combat received new instructions about cooperation and withdrawal. The shift felt seismic to those who had known only conflict. Weapon systems powered down while communication channels opened for the first time in years. The change happened quickly but thoroughly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The agreement established clear frameworks for continued scientific collaboration. Joint research became official policy rather than temporary arrangement. Funding shifted from military budgets to scientific cooperation programs. The facility where they stood became the model for future operations, mixed teams working toward shared understanding. The approach prioritized knowledge over security, curiosity over suspicion. Cultural exchange programs replaced military deployment schedules entirely. Soldier rotations became researcher assignments. Combat training gave way to language and custom studies. The generation-spanning shift toward unity became embedded in official policy. Young recruits would now learn about cooperation instead of engagement protocols. The change felt profound, affecting future planning at every level. The ratification reflected dramatic transformation in leadership perspective. Officials who had advocated for continued aggression now supported collaboration. The evidence of manipulation had changed minds that seemed permanently set. Allegiance shifted from blind patriotism to thoughtful cooperation. The formal process made this change permanent, binding both governments to the new approach. The peace agreement solidified the new era beyond doubt. Signatures carried the weight of law and tradition. The documents contained enforcement mechanisms and review processes that ensured compliance. This wasn't temporary ceasefire, but permanent restructuring of relationships. The formal nature of the ratification made backsliding difficult, if not impossible. The ceremony itself felt different from typical diplomatic events. It occurred in the research facility rather than some comfortable conference room. The participants included scientists and soldiers alongside politicians. The setting reinforced that this was practical cooperation, not abstract agreement. The hum of the ancient power source provided background music to the signing. The treaty created monitoring systems to prevent future manipulation. Joint oversight committees would watch for signs of outside interference. Communication channels between governments became direct and continuous. The agreement built safeguards based on lessons learned from the Void Sect's actions. These provisions showed real understanding of what had gone wrong before. The ratification process included public disclosure of the truth. Both populations learned about the manipulation that had cost so many lives. This transparency felt risky but necessary for lasting peace. People deserved to know why their sacrifices had been demanded. The honesty built foundation for genuine reconciliation between species. The formal agreement closed one chapter completely while opening another. The war became historical context rather than current reality. The future became about building rather than destroying. The signed documents represented more than political agreement. They symbolized willingness to move forward together despite past wounds. The peace felt solid, built on truth and practical cooperation rather than temporary convenience. The joint treaty's completion marked the point of no return. There would be no going back to conflict as usual. The ratification made cooperation the default rather than the exception. The signed documents bound both species to a shared future, whether they were fully ready or not. The formality of the process gave the new relationship weight and permanence that informal understandings could never provide. Vela stood with Frost near the observation window, watching scientists from both species work around the stable energy source. The research facility hummed with productive activity, where weapons testing once threatened catastrophe. Their journey had come full circle, ending where cooperation replaced conflict. The new cultural order felt established now, solid as the mountain around them. Affection and mutual respect marked interactions where hostility once ruled. Human and cryonite researchers shared data with easy familiarity. Laughter sometimes echoed through corridors that knew only tension before. Shared inquiry became the normal way of working. Questions were met with answers, not suspicion. The change felt fundamental, rewriting how both species approached each other. Vela turned to Frost, her violet eyes holding the memory of their first meeting. She spoke the same words, but with completely different meaning. "I'll keep your bed warm," she said, her voice carrying the weight of everything they'd been through together. The offer now symbolized partnership, not desperation. It represented trust earned through shared danger and proven reliability. The warmth invitation carried the significance of hard-won peace. Where it once meant survival through vulnerability, it now meant comfort through connection. The cultural gesture had transformed along with their relationship. Frost understood the depth of the change. His response was simple acceptance, without the hesitation of their first encounter. The moment on the snowy battlefield had become foundational mythology for both species. Children would learn about the warrior who knelt instead of fought, the soldier who listened instead of shot. The story would be told as the turning point, the decision that changed everything. What began as chance encounter became cultural touchstone. The cultural transformation completed their journey from conflict to collaboration. The misunderstanding that nearly destroyed them became the foundation for something stronger. They had built bridges across the gap that separated their peoples. The effort required adaptation from both sides, willingness to see beyond familiar customs. Vela's final offer carried none of the original fear or desperation. It held the quiet confidence of partnership, tested and proven. The bed warming meant shared comfort, not negotiated survival. The cultural context had shifted through understanding and experience. Frost recognized the profound change in that simple phrase. Their personal relationship mirrored the larger transformation around them. The research facility operated with efficiency that military operations never achieved. The cooperation felt natural now, the initial awkwardness replaced by professional respect. Scientists moved through the chamber with shared purpose, their differences becoming strengths. The journey from enemies to partners felt complete in that moment. The cultural barriers that seemed insurmountable had been crossed through courage and empathy. Frost and Vela stood together as living proof that transformation was possible. Their alliance had grown from desperate truce to unshakable bond. The new cultural order valued understanding over suspicion, cooperation over conflict. The facility around them demonstrated what their species could achieve together. The ancient power source pulsed steadily, its energy properly channeled through their collaborative care. The destructive potential had been transformed into shared stewardship. Vela's words hung between them, carrying the weight of peace hard-won and carefully maintained. The offer to keep his bed warm meant more than physical comfort. It symbolized the warmth of trust built across cultural divides, the comfort of partnership forged in crisis. The transformation felt permanent, built on foundations stronger than any conflict. Their story closed where it began, with an offer of warmth. But the meaning had changed completely. The cultural journey from conflict to collaboration stood complete, demonstrated in that simple phrase. The warmth now represented the peace they had built together, the partnership that had saved both their civilizations. The circle felt complete, the transformation absolute. Their journey from battlefield desperation to shared stewardship shows how empathy and courage can dismantle even the most entrenched power structures. Frost's choice to spare a life, to listen rather than shoot, started a chain of events that broke a cycle of conflict. Consider where cultural misunderstandings might be masking chances for connection in your own conflicts. The story ends as it began, with an offer of warmth, though now it carries the quiet weight of lasting peace. That single phrase, once a plea for survival, became the bridge to an entirely new future.